Well, we talked about the introductory part of Dr. Johnson's preface to the plays of William Shakespeare, wherein we talked about his defense of the intermingling of tragedy and comedy, his defense of the violation of the three unities, especially the unit of action and place. In this part of my lecture, I shall be talking about merits of William Shakespeare according to Dr. Johnson. Merits mean positive aspects, the good side, the good qualities of William Shakespeare. But prior to that, before talking about Shakespeare's merits, he comes up with some criticism. He praises Shakespeare, he defends the intermingling of tragedy and comedy, tragic and comic elements by William Shakespeare. At the same time, he defends his violation of what we call the unity of time and place. 8, Johnson thinks that Shakespeare does not have all good qualities as such. Means he does not escape from Johnson's criticism. Johnson has got certain negative observations as well. Johnson goes on listing Shakespeare's faults. I quote, faults sufficient of obscure and overwhelm any other merit. These are the faults which are sufficient to obscure and even overtake other merits of William Shakespeare. Now he mentions some of the flaws, some of the flaws, some of the faults. I shall talk about them in detail in the next part of the discussion. Briefly, let's understand what he thinks about Shakespeare and his faults. Johnson thinks that there is no single system of morality that can be detected in his plays. There is no single system of morality. Means he does not stuck up. He does not, he is not consistent with the system of morality. Morality means some moral lesson. It does not follow a particular system of morality. For example, the morality proposed by Christianity is not consistent with that. Further, Johnson finds his plots loose. The plots are loose. They are not well organized. They are not well structured. Further, William Shakespeare is thoroughly full of anachronisms. Okay, means there are many divergences. I am sure that you have studied the literary terms in which we understood the meaning of anachronism. We started with literary terms beginning with A, where we talked about anachronism. What is an anachronism? It is an error in chronology, a chronological misplacing of persons, events, objects. Now let's say a character is from ancient period, Greek period, and is shown in modern period. So that is what anachronism is. For example, William Shakespeare's play Julius Caesar has these anachronisms. For example, there is a mechanical clock which was not existing when Julius Caesar, the Roman emperor, lived on this earth. Mechanical clock. And there is a mention of a doublet. It's yet another anachronism. And in the second act of the play, Julius Caesar, Brutus and Cassius are plotting Julius Caesar's assassination. And the clock strikes 3 during this particular discussion. This is an example of anachronism because clock was not there. during that period. So this is one of the defects of William Shakespeare's plays. And his jests are very gross. Jests are very gross, means the language is tedious and full of pun and all. It becomes difficult to understand Shakespeare's language. Further, Johnson thinks that he never cares for realism and regards pun as the true dramatic qualities. As a result, he falls into pathos. So this is his criticism, which will be elaborated, but he talks about the merits of Shakespeare. Let's try to understand these merits. Merits mean the positive sides, the good qualities of William Shakespeare. According to Johnson, Shakespeare is such a poet and dramatist of the world who has been edited and criticized by hundreds of editors and critics. So this is what we need to understand about the greatness of William Shakespeare. So he takes it as a positive side. Dr. Samuel Johnson is one of such critics who talked about William Shakespeare and his dramas. Okay, so but when we talk about the literary criticism of Shakespeare, Johnson's edition was notable. There are hundreds of editors and critics, but Johnson's edition is noteworthy. It is notable. Okay, why? For its sensible interpretations and critical evaluations of Shakespeare as a literary artist. So as a true critic, Johnson, in his preface to Shakespeare, points out that Shakespeare's merits or excellences are noteworthy, but at the same time, he talks about his demerits as well. Demerits means the shortcomings, the flaws, the faults with in his plays. And let's try to first discuss the merits as discussed by Johnson in his preface to Shakespeare. The first merit is that Shakespeare's greatness lies in the fact that he is the poet of nature. We talked about it in brief in the introductory part of my discussion. According to Johnson, Shakespeare is the poet of nature. Now, what Johnson says regarding this, I shall quote. Shakespeare is above all writers, at least above all modern writers, the poet of nature, the poet that holds up the reader a faithful mirror of human nature, unquote. So you can see the words used by Johnson. He holds Shakespeare above all modern writers. He modifies. First he says above all writers, at least above all modern writers, above all the writers up to his period. He is, according to Johnson, the poet of nature, and he is the one who holds up to the reader a faithful mirror of human nature. He shows true qualities of human life. So Johnson thinks that Shakespeare's writings represent the general nature, the general human nature, because he knows, who knows Shakespeare? Nothing can please men and please Locke, but just representations of general nature. Now you need to understand. Actually, I quoted Johnson. What he says, nothing can please men. There is nothing in this world which can please, which can make others happy, many. And there is nothing in this world which can make, keep people happy for long period of time. The only thing real in this world is the representation of general nature. That is the reality. Okay, otherwise everything is artificial. Everything is temporary. Nothing is timeless. That is temporary. Nothing is long lasting. And there is nothing in this world which can make everyone happy. Now you take the example of your own family. Means something can make some of the members happy, but someone may become sulky. That is the case. Means it may not be liked by everyone. So therefore, William Shakespeare's characters are the genuine progeny of common humanity. That's what Johnson thinks about Shakespeare's characters. They are genuine. They are real presentation of human life. I quote Johnson, "In the writing of other poets, a character is too often an individual. In those of Shakespeare, it is commonly a species. In many writers, many poets, their characters do not represent others. They are individual characters. There is no one like them. But William Shakespeare represent, they are commonly a species. You might know a particular species. For example, when you say bird, a bird is a species. And as soon as the word bird comes in your mind, the connotations enter. Feathers, beak, two legs, the structure. That is what being a species. For example, a typical species of bird is, let's say, sparrow, crow, etc. Penguin cannot be a species of birds. Penguin will not come in your mind. It's a prototype, Means the prototypical bird is crow, etc. So similarly, Shakespeare's characters represent real human beings. They are not individuals. Of course, they are individuals, at the same time they are species. Hamlet, we saw the example. Othello are the species. They represent human beings of such nature. For example, Hamlet is always confused. Othello is suspicious. Macbeth is overambitious. King Lear can be easily flattered. Okay, so these are the qualities, and that can happen with any human being. Therefore, they are true to nature. Thus, Johnson indicates the universal aspect of Shakespeare's writing by maintaining that Shakespeare is the poet of nature. The second merit that he points out is that Shakespeare's dialogue, I quote, is often so evidently determined by the incident which produces it, and pursued with so much ease and simplicity that it seems scarcely to claim the merit of fiction, but to have been gleaned by diligent selection out of common conversation and common occurrences. What he's trying to suggest here, Shakespeare dialogue, the language used by William Shakespeare is not artificial. It is so natural, because the choice of vocabulary, the choice of words is determined by the incident, by the situation in which that language is used. So it is the situation which determines the language. The language is not used artificially. So there is a kind of simplicity. There is a kind of simplicity in the use of language. So it seems scarcely to claim the merit of fiction. Means there is no fiction. There is no imagination. It is so realistic. Okay. So the selection of words is from common conversation, from common situations. So this is one of the features of romanticism, you might be knowing. So you can see the origin or the birth of Romanticism in Elizabethan literature, and Shakespeare can be considered the first romantic poet in that way. Of course, I'm not officially talking. I said can be considered. Of course, William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge were the romantic writers. Shakespeare cannot be mingled with them, but the qualities of romanticism could be seen in Shakespeare's writing. Officially, romanticism starts in English literature with the publication of preface to lyrical, or the lyrical ballads, we can say, in the year 1798. So Johnson is praising Shakespeare for the use of common language from a day-to-day life. And this language is suitable for the situations. It is the situation which determines the language. Further, the third merit that he's trying to point out here is that Shakespeare's treatment of love proves his realism. So there is a realism in Shakespeare's treatment of love. Now, what kind of realism is there? Now, when we talk about dramatists in general, they give an excessive importance to the theme of love. You must have seen Hindi movies wherein there is excessive importance to the theme of love. While after watching these movies, we think that there is nothing else in this world except love. That is excessive importance. प्यार सब कुछ नहीं है जिंदगी के लिए, प्यार से भी बढ़कर कई काम है. You must have heard the song. But these writers try to show that love is the only thing in this world. So they have given excessive importance to the theme of love. But to Shakespeare, love is the only, I quote Johnson, love is the only one of many passions, and it has no great influence upon the sum of life. It is only one of many passions. There is the feeling of anger, there is the feeling of sympathy. We saw the rasads, 9 rasads. So all these aspects are there, and it has no great influence upon the sum of life. Means you can have a life without love as well. Means in the absence of love, one cannot live life. That is a bit absurd according to William Shakespeare. So in Shakespeare's Macbeth, King Lear, Julius Caesar, love interest hardly has any place. So that's what we need to understand. Further, the fourth merit that he points out, he comments on Shakespeare's characterization. We already talked about it. What Johnson says about his characterization. Shakespeare has no heroes. His scenes are occupied only by men who act and speak as the reader thinks that he should himself have spoken or acted on the same occasion. So the readers start imagining themselves in the position of that hero. He says Shakespeare has no heroes, rather. These heroes are common men. And even when I read or I watch, I witness Shakespeare's play, I feel that yes, it can happen in my life as well. Now, when you see typical South Indian movies or Bollywood movies, you realize the way they beat 100 people together and all. So that is something something which is not feasible, impossible. And whatever happens in the lives of Shakespeare's characters can happen in our lives as well. That's what we imagine. On the contrary, other dramatists portray their characters in such a hyperbolic or exaggerated way that the reader cannot suit them to their life. Can you imagine yourself as Krish? Can you imagine yourself as a robot or any other such superhero like character? We cannot. So Shakespeare does not have these superheroes. They're ordinary people. And we have already talked about this intermingling of tragic and comic element. It's one of the merits of William Shakespeare. And Johnson defends this. For He thinks that there is realism by mingling the tragic and comic elements in his play. Shakespeare is bringing realism in his play. He's exhibiting the real state of sublunary nature. Okay, we already understood this. So the purpose of writing is to instruct, and the end of poetry is to instruct by pleasing. The function is very well served. And the mingled drama can convey all the instructions of tragedy or comedy for its best representation of life. So Johnson thinks that Shakespeare's mingling of tragedy and comedy is a merit because he cannot recollect among the Greeks or Romans a single writer who attempted these things. Greek writers were either tragedians or comedians. They either wrote tragedy or comedy. Even Roman writers like Virgil, etc., did the same. Shakespeare was the only such person who dared to mingle both genres together, both types together. And this is a great merit of William Shakespeare. That's what makes him a real genius. Okay, Shakespeare always makes nature predominance over accident. His story requires Roman, but he thinks only on men. Means his characters are from royal families, etc. But he thinks only on men. Means they appear very common. They appear very real. In the latter part of his discussion, Johnson talks about his demerits, which we already talked about. We shall continue the discussion in the next lecture.